Go for it.
Sure. We're very pleased the way our case went in. It's been a long week, but we felt we got in the evidence that we needed, the evidence that we wanted to do. Our petitioners did a terrific job of explaining what the issues were for them and the desire for a fair process. Our experts all testified extremely well. Professor Kennedy testified as to the strangeness of the maps and their inexplicable departure from historic norms. Professors Chen, Professor Warshaw, Professor Pegden all presented different methodologies against which the enacted plan flunks. It's very clear that what went on here was an intentional gerrymander, and the legislative respondents, Speaker Turzai and Senator Scarnati, really offered very little in the way of defense. There was no factual defense of the plan. They offered no witness who actually said that this was a good plan or a constitutional plan. They offered two witnesses whose job it was to cast doubt on the testimony of our experts. And I think both of their witnesses, both experts that they put up, really failed to do that. In the case of Dr. Cho, it became clear that she hadn't reviewed the material that our experts relied on or that our experts had generated. In the case of Dr. McCarty, Dr. McCarty put forth an analysis which was completely at odds with reality. He had a way of analyzing Pennsylvania election results which were wrong 97% of the time, and the elections that he considered to be toss-ups in Pennsylvania all went Republican 30 out of 30 times. In terms of the way the evidence went in, we think our case went in extremely well, and their case, I think we made the points we needed to. At this point, let me turn it over to others. This was a great team effort, and a lot of different people made this happen. So, who wants to go next?
Hi, I'm Mimi McKenzie, and I'm the legal director at the Public Interest Law Center. And I just want to say that it was an honor to represent these 18 individual petitioners around the Commonwealth in their challenge to this gerrymandered plan. And we heard their powerful stories earlier in the week. We heard some of them through their live testimony. Others are being put into the record through designations from their depositions. But I thought one of the really powerful aspects about our case, and not something you always hear in redistricting challenges, was the juxtaposition of their stories with the expert testimony. And there were lots of places where that intersected, whether it was Beth Lon, who would have been in according to Dr. Chen's calculations, would have been in a Democratic district, I think 99% of the time, or Tom Rentschler talking about what it means, or Dr. Kennedy, I guess, talking about Reading being carved out, and then hearing from Tom Rentschler what that means as somebody who lives a mile or two from Reading. So anyway, it was an honor, but it was also an honor to work with these amazing lawyers from the Public Interest Law Center and from Arnold and Porter, Kaye Scholer, and so I've said enough, and let's let some of the real stars speak. So, Elizabeth?
In addition to everything that David and Mimi have just talked about, what we heard at the trial, in addition to the testimony about partisan gerrymandering being discriminatory, unfair, we heard that partisan gerrymandering is undermining citizens' faith in democracy itself. It's undermining people's trust and confidence in the integrity of the government, and that's something that matters a lot. It matters so much. It's the most important feature of a representative democracy, that citizens, voters have faith that their representatives are representing their views in Washington, and that their votes have the chance to translate into laws, into policies. And what the Pennsylvania 2011 map does is it prevents that from happening, and that's what we're hoping to stop with this trial.
Just to add a couple more pieces about some of the expert testimony we heard in this case. Dr. John Kennedy, who's a professor at Westchester University, walked through district by district showing how cracking and packing, which is the two ways you accomplish gerrymandering, was actually done in this case. He showed how they split up cities like Erie and Harrisburg and communities like the Lehigh Valley, and he showed district by district the specific surgical way in which cracking and packing was accomplished to get a 13-5 Republican plan, no matter the outcomes. And I think it shouldn't get lost sight that the other side literally didn't put on a single shred of evidence to dispute any of that, to dispute that cracking and packing was done in that exact manner with those exact districts. And so I don't think we should lose sight of that. And then the other experts' work, sort of confirmed that intuition, I would say. Dr. Chen not only ran his simulations, he also analyzed data that had been produced by Speaker Turzai in a separate case, data that showed that the General Assembly, in fact, did what the maps suggest they did. They calculated partisanship scores and partisanship indices for every single precinct in Pennsylvania. And Dr. Chen did additional work as well to show, just totally separate from that he simulated 1,000 districting plans that wouldn't apply nonpartisan criteria. And not a single one of those neutral plans would ever produce the 13-5 split that we've seen under the actual plan. Most of them would have produced 8, 9, or 10 Republican seats. So we're talking about 3 or 4 seats that Dr. Chen found have changed hands because of this gerrymander. And there's lots of other experts' work as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak about it.
I'd also like to point out the testimony that we heard from Dr. Wesley Pegden, a mathematician and a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, who has pioneered a new technique that uses computer simulations to figure out whether a redistricting plan is an outlier in certain key respects. And in this case, Professor Pegden was able to prove that Pennsylvania's map has such a strong partisan bias that the only possible explanation is intent. This map had such a high degree of partisan bias that there is an astronomically tiny possibility that this occurred at random. And he was able to do, for example, a trillion computer simulations under a certain set of criteria, generating hundreds of billions of different potential maps that are all slight variations on the current map, and found that our map is the single most biased of any of these potential maps. And this was overwhelming proof that the intent here was to advantage one party at the expense of the voters of another party. And that is completely consistent with all the other expert and fact testimony that we heard in this trial, revealing that that this map was drawn with a specific partisan intent.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes?
What did you think about Dr. Pegden's results showing that even minor changes at the almost single precinct level made the map more fair with just the tiniest alterations?
So what Dr. Pegden's test proved is that this map was very carefully honed and shaped and tweaked to ensure that it delivered the maximum possible partisan advantage, and that any adjustments to the plan, any rearrangement of the borders of these districts weakened its partisan slant. And there's really no explanation for that other than that the people who drew the map made a concerted effort to make it as biased as they could.
And his work went all the way down to the individual precinct level move.
Yes, Pennsylvania has something like 9,200 individual precincts, and his test would switch one precinct at a time from one congressional district to another and find that in virtually every instance, doing so made the plan less biased.
Just a brief remarks that the reason why we had to look to inferences from experts and others is because the people who actually made the map chose not to testify and to rely on whatever privilege they had not to appear. But two members of the General Assembly did testify through, and their testimony was submitted through a paper record, but they testified that the process reminded us that when this plan was developed in 2011, it was done in complete secrecy with no transparency, no consultation with the other side, no hearings on a plan that was actually exposed to the public more than 24 hours before it actually was voted on by the Senate, and through a process that required the suspension of the rules twice in order to be able to rush it through on that kind of a time schedule. So there was lots of opportunities to have had a public debate about what was happening, what would be a best plan to serve the needs of the Commonwealth, and that was not the process that was used here. And talking about the fine grain that was employed here, one of the witnesses from the legislature testified that when he was actually considering in his district to run for Congress, he saw that the new map had, just as Professor Kennedy described, carved out individual areas that were so as to move Democratic districts out of the congressional district and Republican ones in order to make what had formerly been a competitive district into what he determined was a non-competitive district. So there was plenty of testimony about the kind of process that was used to bring this about, and it's a shame that we were not able to get direct testimony from any of the people who actually created the plan.
I'm Stanton Jones from Arnold and Porter, Kaye, Scholer. We brought this case and we've done this trial because we believe that every Pennsylvanian, every Pennsylvania citizen is constitutionally entitled to cast their ballot in elections that are fundamentally fair, and that give all voters, regardless of their political beliefs or party affiliation, a fair opportunity to elect candidates of their choice who will represent their interests in Washington. And it's important because the decisions that get made in Washington by the representatives that we send there make the important decisions that will determine the type of country that we live in, the type of country that we leave to our kids. And this map denies that. It's not fair, it's discriminatory, it targets voters based on their political beliefs, the votes that they've cast in the past for Democratic candidates, the votes that map makers behind closed doors predicted that they would cast in the future. It shouldn't happen, and that's why we did this.